Good morning once again. Welcome back to our lecture video series for FBS 2, Morphology, Taxonomy, and Dendrology. This is part 2 of the lecture series. Now, last video, we ended up with a discussion about the size of mature trees. How it is very important that we also take into consideration in identifying trees by looking at its size, because there are certain tree species that or families of trees that tends to grow really big and really tall. Example are most common again, the Dipterocarp species. So most species coming from the Dipterocarpaceae family like Yakal, Lawaan are trees that can reach up to heights of 50 to 60 meters at maturity in situ. While there are also some tree species that tends to be shorter compared to those one like the Molave or the Vitex parviflora, which mostly reaches to the height of 10 to 20 meters o mga 20 meters or 20 to 25 meters. Now, we also take into consideration gihap ang atong gitawag nga habit. Unsa man habit? In dendrology, we also consider as trees growing in the open and tend to develop characteristics shapes that may be typical of species or genera. So kining gitawag nga atong habit, like there are what we call pioneer tree species that grows well in open areas like grassland areas, and their crowns looks like may pagka-oval or circular or ovate ang shape, because ang kuana na niya kay since na siya sa open area, there is direct exposure to sunlight. Trees tend to produce more branches in order to maximize the light exposure. As again, we discussed that light is very important in order for plants to do photosynthesis, thus making their own food. Now, there are also tree species that are adapted in living under forest canopy. There are trees nga makita nimo pagkadto ka sa mga forest areas, mabantayan nimo nga dili lang kay naa sa pinakaibabaw ang forest nato na nay mga layers. Mo na atong gitawag nga forest strata. Kani nga forest strata may da nga mga plants nga nabubuhi dinhi sa pinakailarom sa forest floor nga gintatawag, then natay gintatawag nga shrub layer. Mo ni ang part sa atong forest strata that more or less those plants that are suppressed in growth, na-suppress ilang growth because there is of course lack of sunlight, exposure to sunlight, there are lack of nutrients because there are much competition nganhi sa atong root system, and then we have the suppressed tree layer, and then we have the dominant layer. So kung ato ning put into perspective, nganhi kita sa pakita na ko ha sa paint. So, ang atong forest, wait lang. Wait, ayun may post ani. Excuse na. Ito. So, for example, if this is our forest, this is the forest floor. Then we have different tree species or plant species that is living within the forest. So, natin gitawag nga stratification. Again, ang stratification, this is the different layers that we can observe in the forest. Sorry. Butang na to, green layer, red layer, orange. Okay, so we have here different tree species in this layer, in the forest strata. This is the codominant layer, the emergent layer, sorry. Emergent layer, and then we have the dominant layer, then we have the suppressed layer, then we have the ground layer. Mauni forest stratification. Yay. Forest stratification. So this different kuan. Again, what I discussed is habit. When we talked about habit, again, this is the way the plants grow. So if we look at the forest, gitawag na damo klase nga kahoy no, damo klase nga mga tanom. Now, since plants tend to have these two requirements in order to grow. Sunlight, one, because sunlight is very important in photosynthesis in order for plants to make their own food. And that naghapon diri sa ubos, we call below ground biomass, ang atong nga mga root system. So plants need also water and macronutrients in order for them to grow well. Now, in the forest, there is always constant competition for sunlight and for nutrient and water below ground. But there are plants develop different what we call adaptive characteristics in order to cope up with such conditions. May tinatawag nga dominant layer. Kani nga dominant layer mo ning majority nga mga kahoy that is present within the canopy layer. Kani sa pinakaibabaw. May tinatawag gyapon sa pinakataas ang emergent layer. Mauni nga mga kahoy nga ning sobra sila sa average height sa canopy. Because, for example, mo itong giyon kanina, species nga diptera, mga lawaan, these are usually can be found in the dominant layer and the emergent layer. The next layer is the suppressed layer, by the word itself, suppressed. So, ang iyang growth, it is inhibited by, syempre, by the growth of the dominant layer of the availability of light, and below biomass layer on the availability of nutrients. And lastly, we have the ground layer. These are shrubs na maglisod og tubo or ingan na naguling ilang kadakon. Now, there is atong study about dendrology pag-identify sa kahoy. It's very important that you have an idea of this particular tree species kung unsa ni siya nga mga pamilya. Because, kani nga mga pamilya, atong nakategorize kini nga mga klase-klase nga kahoy, depende ani nga ilang pamilya para sa tao ba. Ikaw, pamilya kani Pulano. Ang mga kanipod pamilya ni Pulana, lahi ni kanisa malay kulot ug buhok, kani usa straight ug buhok. Para gyapon na sa kahoy, nga ang kaning mga kahoy atong gyapon ning gingrupo og kada pamilya. Sa sulod sa pamilya, gyapon na sila mga bugto primarily singana. That's why we have the genus and the species nga level in identification. Each family share more or less 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nga the same characteristics. That is why we group them into that one particular family. One of consideration gyapon na isang geographic location. Asa siya nakikita? Nakikita ba ning kahoy sa dagat? Daplin dagat, the mangroves, nakikita ba ning kahoy daplin og mga salog? Mga tiga, nakikita ba ning mga kahoy og ngadto sa pinakaibabaw, mga pangpang? Nakikita ba ning mga kahoy ngadto sa pinakaibabaw sa bukid, di ba? These different tree species also have different adaptations and different characteristics that is unique to that particular family. Mo nang ato siyang categorize into one group. That is habit. So next is we also talked about the 4 primary habits sa kahoy. Una is ang excurrent. When we talked about excurrent, this is a kind of habit sa kahoy with a central dominant trunk and symmetrical, conical, or spiral-like crown of many conifers and some hardwoods. Mao ni ang pinaka-basic nga habit sa kahoy, excurrent. So ganingan eh. May da siya usa nga straight nga stem. We call that a stem or bowl. And then you have this conical kung sa pine or oval shaped nga crown. Ang crown ha, corona, man gitawag siya corona kay naa siya pinakaibabaw sa imo nga puno. Man gitawag siya crown. We call that in forestry as crown, ang group of leaves sa ibabaw sa imong puno. And then we have what we call deliquescent or decurrent. When you say decurrent, with repeatedly forked stems giving rise to a spreading form, depends on the relative dominance of the trunk and orthotropic versus plagiotropic. Ang pasabot aning decurrent is repeatedly forked stem. Ang fork, pasabot anang fork, new lang na to ha. Don't say. When I talked about forking, pasabot ana, nakabantay kitag sanga mo ni sanga. Katapos ang sanga nagbranch, mo ni gitawag nga fork. The part whereby ang imong sanga nagsanga pa. Okay? When you say about decurrent, ang kaning imong sanga, di ba, nag-fork siya din hinga part. Kanila what equally symmetrical ang iyang pag-fork na liwat. Nag-divide na po siya dahil usa. Nag-fork na po siya dahil usa. After that, money forking. Money yung first forking na to. This is ang atong secondary forking. After that, nag-fork na po siya. That is our tertiary forking. So, may mga kahoy nga sugad ang ilang habit, branching habit niya. Mo nang gitawag ng mga decurrent branching. That's why makita na to, may sugad ang iyang branching. Kita niyo? That is decurrent. Ang iyang forking, ang iyang pagsanga, symmetrical. It could be symmetrical or asymmetrical. Dili siya equal. Then we have what we call palm-like, with an unbranched trunk and leaves only in a top rosette in palms and in most cycads. Pero ang pinaka-good example ani isang atong lubi. Diba nakita ta sa atong lubi? Ang atong lubi is na lang siya usa nga main trunk, tapos sa ibabaw ang atong mga palwa sugad lang. Usa lang siya kay bali dili siya nagsasanga. Ang palwa nato is only situated in the terminal part of the plant. That is what we call palm-like habit. This is most common sa pamilya sa lubi, which is mga palms, lubi, buri. And again, this is what I also always remind students nga ang most common, di ba, nato, ang common na antiguhan. When you talked about kahoy, mayon ni mga babaw, nakapalit itong kahoy sa lumber shop. Pagbalik nimo, ning palit ka og coco lumber. Pero technically, in forestry, coco lumber is not wood. Again ha? Ang coco lumber is not wood. It is because wood is only the product of secondary thickening in trees. And coconut is not a tree. It is a palm. It's a different category of plant species. Just like trees, we have palms, and grasses. Ang kaning inyong ginpapalit nga coco lumber, this is what we call false wood because this is not product of secondary growth. It's only the product of primary growth in the coconut, which is the growth in length. Mo nang pagkikita ninyo, di ba, nakabantay mo, nakita na mo cross section sa lubi o cross section sa kahoy. Ayan, ato'y butang direct. Nganong matawag na ito nga dili kahoy ang atong lubi. Imagine ninyo, nagputol ka og kahoy sa Jimelina. Dahil, kumpara nimo, nagputol ka lubi. Di ba nabantayan ninyo, magputol ka ni kag kahoy, na kay makita nga murag mga rings bitaw. Na murag mga lidong-lidong diri sa pinutlan sa kahoy. We call that as growth rings. usa ka lidong ana that represents 1 year nga edad sa kahoy. So gusto mo mahibaruan pila edad sa kahoy, just look at